Hi guys, and welcome back to another digital painting tutorial. This time it is how to paint this watercolor leaf in Procreate. Welcome to my channel, Creatively Me with Bree, and yes, I'm Bree. Alright, let's get started. First, select that tool button, select Canvas, Canvas Information, and then go to Dimensions. My canvas is 3800 pixels by 5000 pixels at 300 dpi. Under Color Profile, I select the second from the top color option and then hit Done. In a moment, I'm going to import a watercolor photograph. However, if you don't have one, you have a couple of options. You can take a photo of a watercolor piece of paper like this, utilize a royalty-free for personal and commercial use photo stock image, or you can purchase from a watercolor pack or a paper pack that someone's created for us. If you do end up using an image from a website, make sure that you look over the licensing. The watercolor paper that is here on my canvas came with a watercolor brush set that I purchased last year. However, I am only going to be using brushes that come with the Procreate app. Adding a layer underneath the paper, select the blending mode of the paper until it is on multiply. This will allow any color that we put on the layer underneath the paper to show through. After selecting the color black, I go to my brush library. Under sketching, I then select 6B pencil. Now we're going to sketch out the leaf itself. First, we want a nice swoopy line, and then we're going to have these little branches coming off of the spine of the leaf. Kind of reminds me of like minimalist Christmas tree. And then we're going to make what I call fancy arrows. So we're going to do swoops at the tips of each of the branches. Next, we're going to be connecting the end points of the arrow. So we're going to do swoop. Some will be U's, some will look more like J's, but you get the idea. Swoop. Swoop. Don't worry, I won't say that the whole way through. So here's the last one that's a little bit different. We swoop and then we go in the opposite direction. Swoop, opposite direction. And then we draw in the last bit, the stem. I use the moving tool by selecting the arrow and then just moving my sketch over a little bit. I am also labeling my sketch by clicking on the layer itself and then selecting rename. The sketching layer, I move above my third layer and then I duplicate the sketch and I merge it. And that's to make sure that the lines are as dark as possible. I need to make sure that I close up any of the areas that are open like this. So go over your sketch carefully to ensure that the lines connect all the way around, because we are actually going to use this as a reference to color in. I duplicate the sketching layer and I make one of them hidden. I select one of them and go in with an airbrush, hard airbrush, and I erase basically the branches inside and the spine of the leaf, and you'll understand why in just a moment. This is why we wanted to make sure that we had a duplicate of the sketch just in case we decide what we're about to do doesn't work. It does end up working, but it's always good to duplicate layers and save them just in case what you're about to attempt on a layer doesn't work out. Okay, now we have our leaf without those lines inside. I'm going to take off the reference from the hidden layer, the one on that's the bottom there. Yeah, that one. Take off reference. Click on the layer that we're actually using, hit reference, go back to layer 3, and then I'm just going to drag that color over to fill in the shape of the leaf. Now, if I take off the sketch, you can see that it filled in the spots. Now, obviously, a couple spots were missed, so all we're going to do is just go in with a brush and color it in. As I'm moving around the canvas, I'm sure that you've noticed that some of the points of the leaves are not, the way that we drew them. So we're going to go in and fix them and also create the stem. Now, I could have used a cleaner edged brush to make the sketch so that the lines were crisper, but I actually like that the edges have texture because, as you can see in my actual watercolor painting of a leaf, it has texture and inconsistencies. And so I have this brush under, is it drawing? Yeah, Evolve. And I like that because it keeps with the consistency of the slightly jagged edges, which also I think makes it a bit more believable that we're painting on top of watercolor paper because there are grooves, right? So the paint doesn't just lay flat, it lays in these grooves on this paper that it's soaking into. So I'm just reshaping some areas that I think need texture, that also need retouching. I'm also going into the eraser, going back to that Evolve, so that right here, for example, it's a very straight line. I wanted to round it out a bit more so it looked a bit more natural. And here's another point that just didn't make it when we did the color fill. And I'm just touching up all the areas that need it. It does not have to be perfect. So now I'm going to go into my layers. I'm going to go back to that sketch. I'm going to take the opacity down so that I can at least see where the stem itself is. I'm also going to take off reference because I no longer need it. I'm going to go back to layer 3 where I was working on this leaf. And I'm using the Evolve brush with that texture to finish up the leaf and draw in the stem. Now that I'm done, I can go back in and I can turn off my sketch. Now that we have our layer, that we have the leaf that we're going to paint on, I'm going to add a layer above it and put on a clipping mask. On this clipping mask, I'm going to select a color. I personally recommend going with a slightly lighter color. So even though I picked like a yellow, I still made sure it was even lighter. Now let's select the brush. We're going into the brush library under Artistic and selecting Old Brush. The only adjustments we need to make is under Color Dynamics, and we're just taking out the hue, saturation, and brightness. Essentially, we just want the brush to be consistent. We don't want it to change too much as we're shifting, moving, or applying pressure while we're painting. The reason why I like this brush is if you press down and you don't lift up, it gives you this really neat texture as well as outline. Now that we have this color on the clipping mask on top of the solid color of the leaf, we're actually going to change the color of the leaf. We're going to go into layers. We're going to the main leaf. We're going to select Alpha Lock and we're going to make it like a cream color. Once you have that color selected, go back to the leaf that's on Alpha Lock and select Fill Layer. Now we're going to add a new layer and we're going to make sure that it's put on clipping mask. Now we want to select a slightly darker color. I'm going to go for sort of, that like brownish orange. And I'm going to actually make it just a touch brighter. Now, I hold down the brush because I really like this old beach brush. And like I said, I like the texture, I like the lines that it creates. So I hold down the brush so that I can get this really cool effect. If I lift the brush and paint again, it will start to fill in and you start to lose some of that texture that you see there. Once you have established where you want that color, go into the smudge tool, go under Artistic and select Old Brush. Yes, we're using that as our brush as well as the smudge tool. And then you can start, I call it blending, but yes, you can start smudging the color around. I don't want to tap out or smudge out all of the texture and all of the fine edges that it creates, but I also don't want it to be too overwhelming. And I am going to continue to build this up with different colors, so it's okay if these first initial layers you blend out a bit. Guess what we're doing, guys? Adding another layer and making it a clipping mask. I hope that you're starting to see a pattern. Now we're going to pick a pretty decent red. You can always adjust the colors afterwards. You can also play around with different blending modes. Don't be afraid to pick a color and find out that it's just not what you want. You can always fix it. It also is the benefit of working on multiple layers. So, like I did with the previous layers, I'm placing down splotches, if you will, where I would like there to potentially be, paint. And now I am blending it or smudging it. For example, I think that red at the top is too dark, so I take the eraser, I go to the airbrush, I do I believe the soft blend, and I just turn down the size, turn down the opacity, and I just slowly work at removing it. I don't want to overdo it too quickly. I do get a little impatient, and there you go. But I don't want to overdo it. And now we're going to add a layer and put that layer also on clipping mask. And now we're going to go into our brushes and we're going to select the abstract brushes and we're going to select Storm Bay. Let me show you how I would adjust it. It's what I did for this project. So this is what it is like without me making any adjustments. So I delete the one that I used previously. I'm going to duplicate it so I can make that brush again. All right, so now I'm going to go into color dynamics. I'm going to struggle, but I'm going to get there. There we are. I'm going to take the hue down. And then color pressure is where I really want to stay focused. I don't want the colors too drastically different, so I want to bring the hue down. And I honestly could have brought the hue down a lot more, but that's where I left it. And I played with that for absolutely no reason, and now I hit done. Oh, that's what it looks like. Okay, now I select a slightly darker color. I don't know if it's slightly darker, but darker. I'm on that clipping mask. And now I am brushing in almost like blooms of paint. You could totally get creative with this. I'm not entirely thrilled with all the shapes that I made. But, if you really sat down and took your time with this, you could really, you could get a lot of use out of these brushes and the shapes that you want to see. It looks pretty silly right now, but I promise we fix it. We're going to go back into that smudging tool using the Old Beach, and I'm just going to blend out a bit of the blooming effect that I have going on here. And now I'm going to go on that layer and I'm going to play around with the blending modes just to see if anything looks better, because I wasn't super thrilled with the way it was looking. So I play around until I find one I like, which will be, even I don't remember. It's a surprise to us all. What do I pick? Overlay. Yay. Guess what we're going to do? Add a layer. Select clipping mask. We're going to go back into our brush. We're going to go back to the artistic brushes. Old Beach. And I'm on that dark color still. So now I'm going to add in some of that darker color around the edges. So I chose to do this. You could, of course, use a photo reference. In fact, I encourage it. But a lot of times leaves will start to decompose or dry along the edges first. Of course, there's other discoloration that happens throughout the leaf, but I really like when the edges are darker. So that's why I chose to do that with this particular leaf. You could, of course, keep yours bright and vibrant with no dark edges. It's a personal preference. Once I have all my dark edges, I'm going to go back into the smudge tool. Yes, we're using Old Beach still. And I am going to try and think about what watercolor looks like as like I tap it into wet, already like wet paper or wet color, and how it starts to spread. Because even though the edges are dark, the paint theoretically, right, if I was painting on at least damp paper, it would start to spread a little bit. So I want to make sure that I don't have the color stay too saturated in any one area, but also don't want to overblend or over smudge. Okay, and when I'm done with this, the red layer is still bothering me, so I actually go and I play around with the settings again. And which one do I select? It'd be really funny if I went back to overlay, wouldn't it? No, I do soft light. Okay, and then I swipe to the right on all the layers that I've been working on, and I group them together. Then I duplicate them by swiping to the left, and then I flatten the duplicate. Make sure that you do not flatten your original, which is why I have it hidden, just in case. And like previously, I add a layer on top of this new flattened leaf, and I create a clipping mask. Then I go into the brush library. I go under inking, and I select the Inka brush. And I draw back in the stem and the branches, if you will. Now, obviously we saw the sketch, so if you want to rely on the sketch from the beginning, by all means, go ahead. I didn't feel like I needed to, so I didn't put the sketch back on. I went with my gut on this one. All right, I combine those layers together. I'm on Alpha Lock on a new layer. Guess what? We're not using a clipping mask. Oh wait, we are. But then we go into colors. We're going to pick a pretty bright yellow. Then we select the brush library. We're going to go down to spray paints and select splatter. On the clipping mask, we're going to brush, it'll be hard to see at first, but we're going to brush the splatter in. Now we're going to put it on multiply. This will allow us to see the texture and also where I might want to add more. as you might see now. So if I zoom in, now you can start to see there's some texture. There's also some green that's snuck in there because the brush has a bit of color variation, and I just erased what I didn't like. So now that I have that there, any area that I feel is just too defined, I just end up smudging. We're almost there, guys. Add a new layer. We're not doing anything with it. We're gonna pick that reddish brown color. We're gonna go to the flicks, get that size all the way up, and we're just gonna tap in. If we don't like where it is, we just simply undo by using 2 fingers. And I like, for the most part, where all of that is. So now that I have that down, I'm going to go in with my eraser. I'm going to go back to the hard airbrush, and I'm going to erase any areas that I feel are either too concentrated or just don't serve a good purpose of movement for the focus, if that makes sense. Try and vary up how the splatter appears. That's the way that you can get it to best appear real. Gosh, look at my arms. They're like the splatter of, those are just freckles. That's not paint, guys. Now, on that same layer, we're going to put on Alpha Lock. We are going to select a lighter color. Because it's on Alpha Lock, this lighter color that we're picking will show up only on those splatters, which is technically called flicks because it's the flick brush, but you know what I mean. And we're just looking for color variation. Now we're gonna select an almost black. It's a very, very dark red. And we're just looking to tap in variety of colors. So if you zoom in, you can see there's a lot of different colors happening, which I think makes the splatters look even more realistic. Now I'm gonna take off the Alpha Lock. I'm going to duplicate the layer. And I'm not going to merge them together yet, but I am going to use one of the layers to erase the intensity on some of them. So that way some are more saturated in color while some are, more opaque and transparent. Once I feel good, then I go and I merge those layers finally together. Surprise twist, I duplicate and then I hide one of those layers because, just in case when you go to change a layer and you don't know if you're going to like it, always duplicate it. And I just wanted to make sure that if there were some that were, on top of the leaf that I felt were taking away from the leaf, that I just went in and tried to blend it in a bit. I could erase them, and some of them I do, but some of them I just smudge in. There's me erasing them. Some of them I don't fully erase. I just gently take out some of the intensity. It is a little hard to catch on the camera, but there is subtle variation throughout the piece. Somehow I miss showing this, but I do add a new layer right there. I'm going to drag it down, and I'm going to make sure that it's a clipping mask to the leaf itself. It's above the yellow, and I just wanted to put in a little bit more of this sort of blooming effect using that brush and Abstract, the Storm Bay, and just seeing if there's anything else I can do with it. Now, I do end up messing with the blending mode. I believe I use Add. Honestly, I'm not thrilled with that. I think I'd been staring at the project too long. I really liked the dark brown we just saw a second ago, but you live and you learn. Now in hindsight, I can go back and fix it because I have the file, but you know what I mean. I can't change it on the tutorial. It is what it is, so bear with me. I don't keep it that bright, because no, but I wanted it bright so I could see where it was, so I could smudge. And then I take the opacity down because that was just too ridiculously bright. Now at this point, I would consider the piece done, but I did want to demonstrate by duplicating the leaf in the background, just ways that you could make the edges look a little bit more realistic. So here's one method by using the smudge tool and just moving along the edges and blending the colors. However, what I worry about with doing this throughout the entire piece is when we get to these darker areas. So I want to show what I would do over on this side to make it look a little bit more organic. And I would use the brush again, the Old Beach, and I would brush manually around the edge and then blend. And so that way we get like an edge that's a little bit less crisp, because it's a very crisp line, which may be a preferred style for some, but for those who like softer lines, these are some options that you can take to work out some of the crisp line work. On the duplicate of the leaf, I also mess around with the saturation because I just felt like it was a little too bright, just a little bit. And then I somehow thought I needed to add more. Really, you guys could have stopped a while ago. This part's just me not letting the piece rest, and I should let it rest. Kind of like, you know how you're supposed to let meat rest after it comes out of the oven? You should let your art rest before you continue to do additional add-ons. Just let it sit for a bit. Let it marinate. Come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes, okay? And then I think that if I lower the opacity, somehow it'll make it more palatable. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I think I'm done. And here we go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe, comment, engage, and I'll see you guys on the next tutorial.